The original Mass Effect trilogy is a series defined by the choices the player is able to make and by its successful and failed attempts to do this. I mean, true freedom in a game of this kind is impossible, especially when you consider the intricacies of having to program each and every choice and result into a game and then transfer those choices. It's a lot to keep up with. And some of those choices matter more than others. Perhaps one of the most memorable is the choice between Ashley and Kaidan. More specifically, which one do you save on Virmire? This choice stands out as a life and death decision, but not one shaped by a lot of the larger questions that tend to be involved in the other major decisions of Mass Effect. Whether it is okay to commit genocide to save the galaxy, or the importance of a synthetic life versus an organic life, utilitarianism versus some other value system. There are so many Star Trek-esque moral quandaries in this series that it's easy to get caught up in the wider whys and whatsits of the matter. But when it comes to the choice between Kaidan and Ashley, there's no question of galactic stakes here. You can only save one person or the other. It's one life for another. How do you make this values judgment? The galaxy doesn't necessarily benefit from one more than the other, at least in game terms. Both of them get up to pretty much the same thing within the story. So arguing that one seems to bring about a better universe in terms of what we see in the game seems to be largely out. In terms of gameplay benefits, you lose out on that class in the first game, and maybe that shapes your choice. Maybe you don't want to lose out on a Sentinel, although, hey, you've got both an adept and an engineer in the party, so do you really need him? Maybe you want to keep that pure soldier around because there's no equal in the party. But what if you're a soldier? Even making this decision on purely a mechanics-based paradigm tells us something about you and your Shepard. I would argue here that the Ashley Kaidan choice tells us more about your Shepard and the moral philosophy you're applying through that playthrough than any other choice in Mass Effect 1. And the reason this is, or at least I think one of the most important reasons, is that you are forced to measure two things of seemingly equal value, both of which are human lives, the lives of your subordinate, and you can only save one. You have a commanding officer's Sophie's choice here. You're not just their friend or perhaps even lover. You are their CO, you are the one with total authority, and they go with your choice. You have been institutionally bestowed with the moral right to arbitrate who lives and who dies in the accomplishing of your goal. The moral fallout of this is on you. So why do you make the choice you do? Before we jump into a lot of the answers that I've been given, I'd like to look at some of the moral complications that some of you have given a lot of thought to and others have gone, who cares? The first of which is one I've already mentioned, an officer's responsibility. Mass Effect is a military sci-fi game, but it's a little bit soft on the military. Your player character is given a lot more freedom than a character would have in an actual military, and the regulations are similarly less stringent, which is very common in space operas where the military is an ever-present force and the characters are military personnel. Check out Battlestar Galactica, which is clearly one of the main inspirations for the series, or even things like Universal Century Gundam. There's a lot of emphasis on emulating the trappings of the military, but these characters are given a lot more leeway to act in ways that members of an active military, and at the very least in the active US military, would not. Shepard's status as a Spectre gives even more leeway than would be accorded anyone in the Alliance. So you are given a relatively hands-off operation that is yours to run. This autonomy can obscure some of the actual responsibilities that an officer in the military has for their subordinates. Now, I'm not going to get into military theory here too much or discuss what many military theorists or even educators of officer training programs have said on the topic. I'm going to try and sum it up a little bit more succinctly. You have a responsibility for these lives. You have been given a sacred trust. And in the military chain of command, you are also giving your trust and the entrusted lives of those beneath you to the other person above you in that chain. This is why many military hierarchies are treated as sacrosanct, and why breaking the chain of command can be punished so harshly. It's not just a matter of bruised ego, it's a matter of a functioning machine built on a military ethos. The fact that the writing of the game treats this decision as one of Shepard's greatest failures and trials, and keeps being brought up in later games as something that haunts Shepard, shows us that the character as depicted in the game understands the depth and importance bestowed upon him by this responsibility. And it is a responsibility. It's not just a power fantasy. All of these people serving under you are yours to take care of, not yours to dispose of. Their lives may be spent, as Officer Mendez would say from Halo, but they should never be wasted. And what's even more haunting about these sorts of scenarios, from a military and even basic human perspective, is that the people making these life or death choices are just that, fallible humans who have to live with these responsibilities. And sometimes the people who have made these choices in history have certainly not been always worthy of that responsibility. In real life, life or death choices can be made suddenly or with a great deal of thought beforehand. General Eisenhower, before D-Day, knowing he's going to send a lot of his men to their deaths, faces a different conundrum than does the firefighter who has to race in one of two directions to save a victim, knowing he may not have the chance to save the other. Not to mention, not all personality types will handle this responsibility the same way or feel the burden in the aftermath as another does, and we may or may not judge the person for that. I talk about all this to sort of set the scene for what your Shepard is dealing with in this moment. Your Shepard is in the middle of an operation that the entire fate of the galaxy hinges on. A Krogan army besieging planet after planet alongside Geth and Reapers. That's just a doomsday scenario. So you've got to get the mission done. One of your mainstay personnel, one of your companions, is setting up the bomb to take the facility down. Another has faced increased resistance and you've gone to rescue them. But halfway there, you realize that the bomb location is under attack, or at least your Shepard realizes this, and you're forced to make a choice when the Alliance soldier at the bomb location goes, I've got to make sure this thing goes off no matter what, and starts the timer. So you have a limited window to not only try and save one of these people, but get your ship to a minimum safe distance. One way or the other, that bomb is going off. So you don't necessarily have to go to the bomb location to make sure it does go off. It's happening no matter what. There is no additional objective that rescuing one or the other serves. It really is a question of just who lives and who dies. Unless, of course, you're thinking about Mass Effect 3 unlocks. Since we started with your being a military officer with certain responsibilities, let's look at it from the perspective of said officer. Should you rescue the higher-ranking personnel, Lieutenant Kaidan? By privilege of his rank, does he have more of a right to survive than Ashley does? Real armies have faced decisions like this, especially during retreats. Sadly, examples of this can be found in the Korean War after Zhou Enlai's Chinese forces came to North Korean aid and started pushing back against the UN troops, which were largely US dominated. There were cases of officers being rescued first, or receiving preferential treatment during the evacuation. And this had a deleterious effect on morale, and this is not the only case where this sort of thing has happened. When enlisted men see the officers who are supposed to have the responsibility of looking out after them getting that preferential treatment and leaving them behind, they and others like them go, maybe they don't care about me. This can have some messy consequences for any officer's command. But besides the question of morale and the responsibilities of rank, maybe said personnel have varying levels of value and one is more mission critical, at which point in time it becomes a pragmatic choice rather than one of responsibility. The problem here is that Alenko and Williams are both equally valuable to the mission, at least on the surface level. As I'd mentioned before, on a pragmatic game stats level, maybe you'll go, well, what can they bring? Well, Kaidan's got first aid, but so does Garrus, so does Tally, so on and so forth. Maybe you're a soft class and have no soldier and you want to pick the soldier, at which point in time you can make the argument that your Shepard made a practical choice on the needs of the mission, demonstrating that you, at your core, are a pragmatic individual that is looking to the needs of the mission, or on a meta level, the needs of your game, over other concerns. And the same goes if you'd pick Kaidan. Perhaps you could also look at this on a career front. Is your career likely to be impacted later by friends of these two? And when you look at it, neither one of them seems to have much pull within the military complex. Ashley's family are pariahs. There's no one really looking out for them. And Kaidan has something of a checkered background, which also leaves him something of an outcast. His old L2s and the fact that he also killed an abusive trainer indicate that he's not the most stable of recruits, although he does seem to be able to progress on a more traditional path in rank. So he doesn't seem to be as held back as Ashley. Perhaps even has friends you don't know about. From a career standpoint, if you're that kind of selfish son of a bitch, maybe Alenko's the better choice. That's a pretty personal and selfish reason to kill someone, though, or at the very least leave them to die. And it's only going to get more personal from here as we look at other reasons why you perhaps made this choice. And remember, you are the controller of Shepard. You are making decisions for Shepard. And many of these decisions exist for reasons that come from outside the game, but Shepard, that version of the character, is still making the decision, and there's still some narrative reasoning that character had to make, shaped by your choices and your dialogue options, for that event. So I'm going to look at it as Shepard living with the consequences and reasons, noble or otherwise, for that decision. I'm not going to treat it as a purely artificial meta thing. But I am going to look at responses others have had and talk about how this may have played into Shepard's perspective and some of the things that we may not like to talk about when it comes to ourselves, or be fine talking about, who knows. One of the principal reasons that I see for why people have made the choice Ashley or Kaidan seems to be based on which one they were fucking, or were going to fuck, depending on where they were in the story. One of my friends would wax on and on and on about Kaidan's butt. As far as I can tell, it doesn't seem all that different from anyone else's in the game. But maybe I lack her bootylicious supervision. She still is my resident expert for all things related to butts. And that should probably give you some idea of what listening to one of her playlists is like. Now, I want you to think about that as a reason for choosing one life over the other when you are their commanding officer, and think about the potential ethical pitfalls here. There's a reason it's a little bit of a dicey thing for a superior officer to be dating a subordinate. It complicates things. It can lead to morale issues, lack of logical thinking, and it can lead to preferential treatment, like, I don't know, saving one person over another. Shepard gets to bend or even break regulations because of the privileges of his or her position. But does that make it right? When that Shepard is talking about it was the right decision, but one of the hardest ones I've ever had to make, later on in the game, or in one of the sequels, is that Shepard secretly going, I did it for a fuck, oh my goodness, it really is why I did it. is that not a betrayal of the position afforded to you? And if so, is your Shepard okay with that? I think that would say a lot about Shepard, or in this case, a lot about your Shepard. And it's not like this isn't a factor in real life decisions. There is a measurable difference between the sentences attractive people get in court, or the sentences people who hurt attractive people get in court, compared to those who are less conventionally physically attractive. Attractiveness also often correlates to greater opportunities. And even when you're watching a lot of movies where the hero's sweeping in to save some people, does he usually start with the hot babe, or does he go and help someone else, his best friend Fred? Lust and love both complicate things a great deal. And then there are the morale problems that could stem from this, and I think this is a missed opportunity of BioWare's. If you consider the consequences of saving your lover for the crew, might they think, hey, we could be next if we're put in a life or death situation and Kaidan is on the line with us? We're screwed. Dialogue that shows signs of doubt in Shepard's leadership, or pondering the reasons for Shepard's choices, especially if the relationship's out and out well known, could be a great way for players to feel the narrative significance of what they've just done. Take this a little bit out of the context of the game and look at the real world a bit. Would you be okay with your life being worth less than someone else who's more attractive than you to the person who could be saving you? And how would you feel about working with that person? Then I want to talk to you about a common social phenomenon represented in both the arts and outside of them in societal practices. And there is this perception of men being more expendable. Now, this could relate to certain factors of early human existence, or biological constraints on people in society, or even certain brutal calculus. Let's say you've got a tribe of people, 10 of them can reproduce and 10 of them can't. Which people would you send to war, and which people would you keep at home where they can safely replenish your numbers? You would think that the massive deaths in World War I and World War II would have made significant impact on population sizes, but it barely seems to be a blip. Populations kept on skyrocketing. So that might be part of it. There have also been social experiments on men and women when they're in a danger scenario together, and men tend to react to women being injured differently than they do when it's other men. At the very least, in the limited data we have of it. Tack on to that how people respond to film and the arts. Violence against men is often treated as a norm, or violence against women is treated as something more extreme. Do you think that this could play into some people's perceptions of whose life is more valuable, and how do you feel about that if you're the one who made the choice on such grounds? I'm not trying to take all the fun about this. In fact, I see these sorts of questions as fun. I'm like, ooh, what would I really think in this situation? Others who don't find that so fun, by all means, that's up to you. So this isn't me going after you for your choices. This is kind of a no-win scenario. But ask yourself why. And perhaps related to their fuckability or attractiveness, their personalities are also reasons that people cite for choosing between them. And that really can be its own kind of screwed up. Well, I found Ashley boring, so I killed her. What? You killed a woman because she was boring? What the hell, Shepard? We've all been trapped in boring conversations one way or the other, but that's going a little far, isn't it? Now, on the meta level, yeah, we might pick the character that we find the most interesting to stay in the game longer and spend more time with them. But on Shepard's level, is that why they made that decision? Well, I really love Ashley's conversation a lot more, so Kaidan, you're a dead man. Or put less ridiculously, Shepard reacted on gut instinct because they felt closer to one or the other because they were better friends. Maybe, as many people in the comment sections and forums seem to do, you made a choice because of some moral leaning. A lot of people go, well, Ashley's a racist, so I killed her. And I went, that's all it takes to dehumanize someone to the point where you don't care whether they live or die? Slap a label on them? Besides, technically she would be speciesist. Others have claimed to kill or save Kaidan based on the fact that he is revealed to be bi in the third game. Is someone's life really more or less valuable because of their sexual orientation? Are you really taking that into account when you save their lives? I honestly think some people would. Now, there are other factors that could shape your decision as Shepard. Perhaps you're looking for, hey, who might lead the team if I die, especially since it's an alliance/human-centric mission. It's gonna be one of those two that picks up after you. Maybe you think Kaidan has better leadership capabilities because Ashley has difficulties working with aliens. Pretty pragmatic choice there. Or maybe you think Ashley has humanity's interests in mind and therefore she's the best choice. She'll keep her eye on the eventual goal. Or maybe you're playing through this game again and you didn't like the consequences of walking through a certain space and finding it empty and wanting to have the character who occupied that space back. And indeed, the empty space and the quiet in the area where those characters used to occupy is one of the things that I think drives home the permanence and importance of that choice. I'm actually glad they did not offer you the choice to save both of them. Despite this choice not being a question of great political change or shifting the powers of the galaxy, you still see significant repercussions, indeed the most permanent solid repercussions of the game. An entire character who could be visiting you in 2 to lecture you on Cerberus, or be in your squad in 3, or be there for you to kill in 3, is gone. You don't have to worry about BioWare going, oh, your choice doesn't matter, Udine as the counselor no matter what. This choice stays. Perhaps the last major factor I'd like to point out is the eventual possibility that one of these two can become specters. And specters are in many ways both a arm of the Council, but also an exemplar of the species that they came from. Perhaps also consider which of these two do you think would be the best representative of Earth and human values. Perhaps a Shepard with his mind toward the future thought about this. I don't know why your Shepard made the choice he or she did, but as I stated in my thesis, it says a lot about them. But notice that I didn't say in my thesis what specifically it said, because that's something I want you to determine for yourself. Look at these points I've outlined. Look at some of the conundrums that this brings up and go, who is my Shepard based on the choices I had them make? It might be a fun little exercise for you. Anyway, you have a very nice day.